Welcome to the studio review for chapter 27, Fetch in JSON. We are going to create a simple web page that fetches some data from launch code. They have an endpoint here and just display information about some astronauts on the page. So they have a studio repository where you can go and fork it to your own account. And then once you have that, you can clone it down to your computer. And we'll look at the starter code in a second, but they tell us that we just want to, add some JavaScript to make sure that it runs once the load event is detected for the window, and then make the GET request using fetch to this endpoint on the astronauts API they created. And then we'll just take the data that comes back from that and turn it into some HTML and add it to the page. So they show you what the JSON is going to look like, that it's an array and each object represents a different astronaut with unique data for that astronaut. So we'll have multiple astronauts on the page. And then here, this is the HTML template they want us to use. Every astronaut should have something that looks like this. The difference is we won't be hard coding the information. We're going to loop through that array and put this in dynamically using some JavaScript so that the values for these are always unique for every astronaut. And then once you are done with that, it should look something like this, where each astronaut has its own little card here with its, the bio and the image. And then there are some bonus missions. We can sort the astronauts so that each card appears ordered by the most hours in space down to the least. We can make this active text green if it's true. And then we can also add a count of how many astronauts there are on the page somewhere. So I'm going to do all of this with you here, and we'll just start at the top. So I already forked and cloned this down. I've got the starter code here, and you can see the HTML they've given us is pretty simple. We just have an H1 heading that has astronauts on the page, and then a container that we will add things to using JavaScript. So there's nothing really coded here inside of it, hard coded. We'll do that dynamically. So that's it for this. They have a couple of CSS classes to use. And then here we will actually write all of our code. So let's actually go ahead and get this spun up so we can see what it looks like with live server. And you can see there's just that heading as expected with nothing else on the page. The other thing I want to do, because we're working with JavaScript, is open up this browser DevTools. And that way we can make sure we're kind of keeping an eye on, and I'm going to make this a little bigger since we've got the DevTools. There we go. We'll keep an eye on our requests that we're making and, anything that we might put into the console. We'll have that already set up, good to go. Okay. So let's go over to the JavaScript. It says, the first thing to do is to make sure we're detecting that load event so that we can wait until the page is loaded to have any interaction with the HTML elements. So I'm going to start by saying window.addEventListener, give it the load event to listen for, and then give it an anonymous function. There we go. And now any code that we want to add, we'll just do inside here, and it will definitely not run until the page is loaded. Okay, now we know that ultimately we are going to need some, this container, we're going to need to add things to it. I'm going to just put this as a to-do for now, create object for container element. Okay. But right now let's fetch. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to solve this for you first with the traditional syntax, because even though most people use async await these days, you probably at some point could run into some legacy code that has some of the older syntax here. So I'm going to do it both ways. We'll start with the traditional. So I'm going to say fetch using traditional syntax. And then we just say fetch. And we do not want this dot fetch, we just want fetch. And inside here, we want to give it the URL that's the endpoint, which they give us over here in the instructions. So I can just copy this and paste it right in here. And now it knows where to go. So then we have to handle the promises. This is where, with the traditional syntax, we're going to use then to say, once you actually get a response to this request, then here's what I want you to do. And we're going to give a function and capture the response. And then we can work with that response. So now we'll say, let's open up the response and get that JSON unpackaged. And then once that is done, then again, we have another function we want to run, but only once it's been done. So this is another promise. So we're going to say this time, the thing that we're extracting is the data. And you can call that anything you want, response and data. These are just my choices to name these parameters this. They really can be whatever you want. But this will give me something to work with once it's been extracted from the response. So now I have data and I can work with that. The first thing you want to do is to test and make sure that your fetch is indeed working the way you expect. So let's just console log this data temporarily so we can see it. So if we come over here to our page, and there it is. As soon as the page loaded, it went and it fetched it. And now we have, looks like 7 different astronauts that we're working with. And you can see that you can, this is interactive. It does not look like traditional JSON because it's an interactive format that is built into the browser. You may also notice that in Chrome, at least, it orders these keys alphabetically. So this, when you have like 100 keys, it helps to actually have it this way to be able to find what you're looking for, because sometimes data can be really massive. So it may not be in the order that you saw it elsewhere, but this is what's going to be ordered in here. And we also can check this over in the network tab and look at it from the standpoint of the request that was made. We can see here that initially it just pulled the files that were needed for this. And then here, if we look at the header, it says, here's the endpoint that you requested it from. It was a GET request. It has a status code of 200, which means okay. It means it came back as expected. And you can see here that the content type is application JSON. And so the preview will look a lot like it did in the console, where it's interactive and you can kind of collapse and expand these. But the response will show you the original JSON. So you see this exactly as you would expect JSON to look, where all the keys are in quotes and everything, just kind of is lined up this way. It's not interactive. It's just raw JSON. But it's, in color, and that's kind of helpful. So this is what you do. You fetch this data, and then you come and you look at it to make sure it is what you think it is. And you can get a preview here of exactly what kind of keys you can work with and how things are nested, which will help you when you're going to access the data in order to display it on the page. So now we have a way to kind of, look at that and see how it is, because your textbook might give it to you here, but that's not usually the case in real life. You have to go look at it. So let's take a look at what we need to do next. And I'm going to leave that up for now because we may want to refer to it. Let's see. So if we come over here, it says, add each astronaut returned to the web page and use the template shown below, and make sure to use it exactly as they've given it, including the CSS classes, so that we're using what they've already provided. So this is the template, but the first thing we have to do is create that object, remember. So I'm going to say, const container equals, and just go to document.getElementById and give it container. And now we have something we can add it to. Okay. So keep in mind, this data came back as an array. That means we need to loop through it. And remember, each one of these is just for a single astronaut. I'm going to go ahead and put this on my clipboard. It says don't copy and paste this into your HTML file. That's true. You should type it out because it will give you practice on working with all of this. However, because I'm trying to just get through this quickly for you, I'm going to copy and paste. Okay. So here we go. We want to start by just setting up a loop. And, you can do a classic loop if you'd like, and just go off of the length of the data that came back and say, we'll just go through these one at a time until we're done. And I'm going to, for the sake of this not being super messy with all the bracket index, because we're going to be accessing this data in multiple places, I'm just going to create a local variable called let astronaut. And that tells me this is what this represents. It's not just this, abstract data. Each one of these that we're looping through represents an astronaut. And then I'll just say, it's data at index I. So that's the object that we're looking at in the, let's go back to this. Yeah, each one of these objects represents it. So when I'm at index 0, index 1, okay, so we're going to look at these one at a time. All right, so I've got this, I can now use astronaut wherever I'd like to access the key value pairs that are inside that object. So we're adding it to the container. And you remember we can do that with inner HTML. And this is one of those where it definitely is important to use inner HTML and not inner text, because we are going to be adding an entire block of HTML. So I'm going to say container.innerHTML, and we're going to use plus equals because we want to keep adding it. Every time we come around to a new astronaut, we want to add on to what's already there. And right now, it's just an empty string. There is nothing inside the container element, but we're about to change that. So the next thing I would recommend you do is, we definitely want to use a template literal here. And you can make this real easy on yourself by hitting enter and letting can format your, there you go, wrong key. You can format your HTML nice and clean inside here and make it exactly the way you want it to look. It looks like things are not lined up quite right. Let me fix this. Yeah, so you can see we've got the astronaut div, and like right now you can see already on the page, it's adding it. It's just adding it over and over again with her information specifically because it's hard-coded. So this is where we need to change things. We need to actually access the specific astronaut's data. So let's go to here and say, let's go back and look at our information here. And we want to make sure that we have the right key name. So like first name and last name, for example. So we're going to need to do two things here. We're going to need to do astronaut dot first name and then astronaut dot last name. And once I clean that up, you can see that now every single one of these has a different name. So we just need to keep doing that. We need to go through and make references to the keys and their values with JavaScript for each of these values, and then it'll be different every single time it loops around. Okay, so hours in space there again. I'm going to go double check my data here. And hours in space is just hours in space with a camel case. So I can replace the 190 here with a placeholder and just say astronaut dot hours in space. Okay, and now we can see that information is updated for every single one of them over here. All right, same thing with active, and we need the skills, but yeah, the skills is going to be a whole nother thing. Let's do this one first. So we'll just say astronaut dot active, and it will just stringify that Boolean value. Okay, so false, 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 false. But if we get down here for the last two, we see that those are both true. Okay, so now we take care of the skills. Now here's the thing. If we look at this data, we can see, we can see that the skills is actually an array that has multiple elements in it. And we want them to display the way that they look here on the page, where every single one of them has a comma and a space between. So this is where we can use our array and string methods that we learned at the very beginning of the unit to make that happen. So we can go to astronaut.skills, and if we just let it stringify it automatically, it's going to have all the commas, but it doesn't have the spaces. So this is where we want to use the join method and say, take every single element in the array and join it with a comma and a space, and now it looks the way we expect it to look. So it's one of those things where it just makes it a lot easier to read, makes it friendly the way that it's presented on the page. Okay, the last part is the source here, and they have this kind of shortened version here that doesn't actually mean anything, because if we look at the original data that's coming in, we have a much longer URL here that is where those images are stored with their individual names. So we actually are going to need to just use this thing directly. We can just say astronaut.picture to get that source. Okay, so I come in here and say astronaut.source. Oh, not source, picture. There we go. That was remember to use the correct key names from the JSON. There we go. Now we have all of our pictures. Okay, so that's it. That is how to do this for using the traditional syntax. So now if we want to go down and use the more modern syntax with async and await, we can do that. I'm going to start over here and blank that out. All right, so I'm going to say fetch with modern async / await syntax. And we'll also do the bonus missions as part of this section down here. Okay, so the first thing that's different about using async and await is you have to create a function and then call it so that you can say that this function is asynchronous. So I'll say async function fetch and display astronauts. So I'm going to give it a meaningful name, that this is what this function will do once we call it. And now we can continue with the actual fetching. So getting the response in the data, since we're not using the dot then thing and kind of extracting it from these anonymous functions, you can just create variables directly. So I'm just going to say let response equal, and then I'm going to say await. This is where we handle the promise fetch. And I can go and get that endpoint. And I failed to put the quote on the front end. There we go. And that's it. That's the response. And then I can just say let data equal, and then again, await response.json. So you can see this is a nice, clean way to do it. And I really like this modern syntax a lot. It's just super easy to read. You handle the first promise, you await the fetch to get the response, then you await unboxing the response to actually pull the data out, the JSON. And that's it. So now we have data, we can work with it. So this part is actually pretty much the same. I can copy this for loop from here. Let me undo that, and then oops. Actually, I accidentally clicked on it while I was. Okay, that's fine. So I'll come in here and we will loop through again and do everything the way that we intended it to be done. And you may say, why is none of this showing up on the page? You've got all this. Well, again, we have to call this function that we defined. So right now I can go and call it, call the async function. Okay, so we'll just say fetch and display astronauts and call it. And once we do that, there it is. So now we have the exact same result of looping through and looking at each of the data once we fetched it, and adding the information dynamically to the page. So that's how to do it with the async await syntax. So let's talk about these bonus missions. Let's go look at them one at a time. So the first one is to display the astronauts sorted from most to least time and space. Okay, we're going to want to do that right between here. So I'm going to say bonus mission 1. And we can just use a sort function. Now, you may remember from learning about this previously with JavaScript that the JavaScript sort function is limited in what it can do, but it allows you to give it anonymous functions to do things that are more complex. So I can just say, I want to sort by a key within these each of these objects that I've got in the data array. So I'm going to sort on the array, and I'm just going to give it, this is pretty much the standard sort function for when you need to do something a little more complex. And in this case, this anonymous function is just going to return a comparison of hours in space for, what we're calling A, and is it less than B dot hours in space? And if so, we return 1, and if not, we return -1. And what it'll do is it'll go through the entire array and keep checking these until they finally are all sorted in the right order. So you can Google this any way you want about how to sort on keys of an object in JavaScript, and you'll get some variation on this. So that's it. But then, of course, yeah, the reason that I'm putting it here is because sorting is one of those things that once you do it, it's done. And so now when we're working with data here, it's already been sorted. So it's important to do it after you fetch the data, but before you start looping through it. So now if we look on the page, we can see that we're starting with Ellen at 979 and going all the way down to Jeanette, who has 0. Okay, that was bonus mission 1. Bonus mission 2 is to make the active true text green for any astronauts that are still active. Okay, so this part, what I would like to do is to actually handle this right inside this loop, because we have to look at it one at a time. And I'm going to, take note of the fact that, we're going to need to have a class here. So I'm just going to call this, let's call it .active, and not base it on the color. But we will set the color to green and see if there's anything else I want to do with that. Nope. We'll just set it to active, or set it to green. Okay. And then we can actually do the logic to check and see whether it should be applied or not. So right after here, where I go and I say, let's just call this astronaut to make it simpler, we'll do bonus mission 2. And I'm going to create a variable to hold the string that represents the class. And I'm going to use a ternary operator to say, is the astronaut active, to evaluate that true or false as a Boolean, and say if it is, then we want the class is called active. We want to use the active class, and otherwise we don't want to add a class at all, so we'll just make it an empty string. And then we can actually use that variable to stand in for either this or this. So I'm going to go to this list item here and just say class equals, and then give it using a placeholder active class. And again, if it's an empty string, it doesn't matter. It just won't add a class. So this should control whether it gets added or not, because we handled the logic right here and just stored it in a variable. And there we go. We have active true and active true for those. Cool. Okay. Bonus mission 3 is to add a count of the astronauts to the page. That is very straightforward, because we can get the count directly off of just, how long is the array, right? We get the data back and then we can check that immediately. So it doesn't really matter whether it's been sorted or not, but so I guess we could do it here. Bonus mission 3, oops. And we'll just say first we got to go get our object. I'm going to say, let's create something on the page, and we'll give it an ID of count. So we actually need to go create that. It doesn't currently exist. So if I come here, I can just say div ID equals count. And we're just going to add what we need to for bonus mission 3. But we will do it dynamically. So we have our object. It represents that div I just created. So now we can add to the inner HTML. When I created this solution a few years ago, I was waxing poetic. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it. These data.length extraordinary people are a few of the handful of humankind who have had the privilege of looking down on our beautiful planet from the quiet darkness of outer space. You do not need to be this crazy, but it works. So I just went and got the length of the array, and that's how I know how many astronauts they are. And so I just add that. So now we come back here and we see this little paragraph right here up ahead of our cards with each of the astronauts. Okay. So that's all of the bonus missions. If you want to play around with it and take it a step further, you most certainly can. I actually kept messing with this as a student because I was so interested in front end work, and I created some more CSS and added Google Fonts and an image. So I'm going to add that in now. Let me go. Grab this, we'll go to the CSS file, and I will actually take this and replace it. And then we actually need to go pull in the Google Fonts from the other in the HTML file. So I've got what I need for that here. Hold please. All right, so right up here, I can just add that to go and get these 2 different fonts that I want to use. And it looks kind of funny now because we've got like some kind of, this is called ghost white. It's an off-white color, but we need a background. And so I'm going to need to copy that over. And there you go. I have added this images folder with this background image of the Earth. And you can't really see much of it because I've got this all. Let me pull this back. Oh, and I see I did not actually make it tile. I probably should have made it tile, but that's okay. So this is the way this looks now on the page, and everything stands out. I kind of got this, separated out with some spacing. You can see I made the images bigger. I just kind of, I tweaked everything a little bit here and there. So that's how you can make it even fancier. But there you go. I hope this has been fun for you. It's certainly, this kind of stuff is so fun for me. But I will see you in the next one.